The interview room fell silent the moment she stepped through the door. Not because she was important, because she looked ordinary. Her shoes were worn at the edges. The sleeves of her simple blue dress had been stitched by hand. She carried a faded folder instead of an expensive leather briefcase. A few candidates sitting outside exchanged amused smiles. She came for the janitor's job. One whispered. Another laughed. No way she's here for the civil service exam. Even one of the interview assistants glanced at her clothes, before looking away with a smirk. The young woman heard every word, but she didn't respond. She simply smiled politely, adjusted the old folder in her hands, and waited for her name to be called. What no one knew was that she had walked nearly 4 miles after the last bus broke down because she couldn't afford another fare. Inside that worn folder were years of sacrifices, sleepless nights, and a promise she had made to her dying father. A promise she refused to break. Candidate number 47, Miss Emily Carter. She stood, took a deep breath, and walked into the interview room. 5 senior officers sat behind a long wooden desk. The chairman barely looked at her resume before raising an eyebrow. You graduated from a public university. Yes, sir. No private coaching, no, sir. You prepared by yourself, yes, sir? Another interviewer leaned back with a smile that didn't seem friendly. You know thousands apply every year. Why do you think you're qualified? Emily answered calmly. Because serving people isn't something I learned from books. I learned it from life. Several interviewers exchanged curious looks. The chairman folded his hands. Interesting answer then. He picked up a sheet of paper. Let's see how prepared you really are. The questions became harder. Economic policy, administrative law. Ethics, disaster management. Constitutional procedures. Emily answered each one carefully. Not too fast, not too slow. When she wasn't completely sure, she admitted it honestly instead of pretending. The room slowly changed. The smiles disappeared. The interviewers stopped looking at her clothes. Now they were listening. One member suddenly asked, Imagine your own brother commits financial fraud while working under your department. Would you protect him or prosecute him? Without hesitation, Emily replied, I would protect justice by prosecuting him. The interviewer raised an eyebrow. Even if your family hated you forever. She nodded. If public servants place family above the law, then citizens lose faith in the government. Trust is harder to rebuild than relationships. Silence. The chairman quietly wrote something on his notes. Another interviewer decided to test her emotions. If a politician pressures you to approve an illegal project, and refusing means losing your career, what would you do? Emily smiled softly. My career belongs to me. My integrity belongs to the nation. I can rebuild a career. I cannot rebuild my character once I sell it. No one spoke for the first time that morning. Every interviewer looked directly at her. The chairman leaned forward. Tell us something that isn't written on your resume. Emily took a slow breath. My father cleaned government offices for 23 years. The room became still. He used to tell me that every desk inside those buildings belonged to the people, not to the officers sitting behind them. Her voice remained steady. When he became seriously ill, he apologized because he couldn't afford coaching classes for me. She smiled gently. I told him, education isn't purchased by expensive teachers. It's earned by determination. One interviewer quietly removed his glasses. Emily continued. The night before he passed away, he held my hand and asked me for one promise. What promise? The chairman asked. Become the kind of officer who remembers the people waiting outside the office, not just those sitting inside. No one interrupted. He said, poor people don't need sympathy. They need fairness, and fairness begins with someone willing to say no to corruption. Emily looked around the room. So I studied every morning before sunrise, worked evenings at a grocery store, tutored children at night, and saved enough money for one interview suit. She glanced down at her stitched sleeves and smiled. But when my neighbor's son needed emergency medicine last week, I spent that money on him instead. One interviewer whispered almost to himself. So that's why. Emily nodded. I can buy another dress someday. I couldn't buy another child. The room was completely silent. Even the assistant outside had stopped typing. The chairman slowly closed her file. I have one final question. Emily nodded respectfully. If you do not get selected today, what will you do tomorrow? Without hesitation, she answered. I'll wake up early, I'll study again. I'll work again, and I'll come back next year. Because failure can delay a dream, it should never end one. The chairman smiled for the first time. Thank you, Miss Carter. She bowed politely and left the room. Outside, the same candidates who had laughed earlier stared at her. She simply wished them good luck. Days later, the final results were published. Hundreds rushed toward the notice board. Someone shouted, "Candidate number 47." Another voice interrupted. "She's ranked first." The crowd froze. The girl with the stitched sleeves, the one everyone had underestimated, had achieved the highest score in the entire examination. Reporters later asked the chairman why Emily had received such extraordinary marks. His answer spread across the country. "We didn't select the best-dressed candidate. We selected the person who remembered why public service exists." Months later, Officer Emily Carter visited the same government building, where her father had once mopped the floors. She walked through the entrance, wearing the official uniform of a civil servant. The elderly security guard recognized her immediately. "You made your father proud." Emily looked toward the polished hallway, where her father had worked for decades. With tears in her eyes, she whispered, "No. He made me worthy of this uniform." Sometimes people laugh because they only see your clothes. Sometimes they doubt you because they only see your circumstances. But character knowledge and perseverance speak louder than appearances. Never let someone's first impression become your final destination.